Today, we're revisiting an old friend, that being Trap Shaddolls. What is up, guys? This is tcgsam here, and in today's video, I'm coming at you guys with my updated Trap Shaddoll deck profile for the post-June/July Duelist Nexus format. So, without any further ado, let's just hop straight into the deck profile. We're going to start things off with the monsters. We are playing 3 copies of Squamata. The reason we're playing 3 Squamata in this deck is because of certain cards that we're playing that synergize very well with destroying cards that we control, and Squamata is just one of the best ones to destroy because you can get any Shaddoll card that you want in that situation, so you can send monsters or spells and traps, and that just having that option is very good because that trap already gives you a lot of options, but now you have even more so with Squamata. Then next up is 3 copies of Shaddoll Hedgehog. So I'm also maxing out on Hedgehog because it's also another great one to destroy because it gets you more hand advantage with another Shaddoll monster, and then you can keep making your fusion plays from there. Also, since this deck is a lot slower than normal other Shaddoll builds are, you're able to set up Hedgehog and actually flip it to get its good effect, quote unquote, to search a Shaddoll spell or trap, so you can just control the game from there. I think 3 is pretty good in this deck because, like I said, you are trying to destroy your own Shaddoll monsters with a card in your deck, and just having Hedgehog to get more advantage is really good. Next up, I'm playing 2 copies of Wendy's, so you can bump this up to 3, but I didn't want to play too many Shaddoll monsters. I thought 2 Wendy was solid, having the option to have a different attribute that's able to be searched to make Apkallone, but also just setting another Shaddoll monster from deck is also pretty solid, getting you an extra body. And then for the one of Shaddolls, we're playing 1 Beast, 1 Dragon, and 1 Falco. So Beast is pretty self-explanatory. Dragon is just good against those back row decks. You don't necessarily have to play this. You can side this and play another different Shaddoll monster instead. You can consider a card like Nail Shaddoll Aerial or Hell Shaddoll Hollow even, because Hell Shaddoll Hollow in this deck you can actually set and then get its effect, which is pretty strong. Falco in this deck is because we're playing a grindier version of Shaddolls. We just want to be able to get back our resources more often. Let's move on now to the spells of the deck. We're playing 3 copies of El Shaddoll Fusion. So El Shaddoll Fusion is definitely the better Shaddoll Fusion in this deck because you can use it on your opponent's turn as a disruption. It also potentially helps you play through back row removal because you can just chain this and at least end with some Shaddoll presence on the board. Definitely want to max out on it. I am just playing 1 copy of Shaddoll Fusion. I would definitely side the other 2 copies for going second, but in the main deck, I think 1 is fine because you're not really trying to fusion summon all the time. Like in this deck, setting a monster and then setting a bunch of back rows actually pretty solid, and that's sort of like the game plan that we're going for. So just having 1 copy of a searchable Shaddoll Fusion as a blowout is pretty solid in the main deck, but I think you would only want to put in the 2nd and 3rd copy when you know you're going second. So that's why I only play 1. And then perhaps the best Shaddoll Fusion spell is Super Polymerization. So Super Polymerization just outs pretty much anything, works super well with the Shaddolls because you have all these different attributes that you can Super Poly into, so Super Poly is pretty much never dead into any matchup. And that's very important because this card is incredibly strong. Not many decks are able to actually do anything about it. Just having a blowout card like this can be incredibly good, and it just synergizes super well with the Shaddoll deck. The next up for the trap cards, I am playing 3 copies of Gozen Match. You definitely don't have to play this. You can play any 3 traps you want here instead. I just figured if you want to go for a more competitive build, you do kind of have to resort to cards like this. You are able to play with just dark monsters on the field, and just the fact that this will completely lock some opponents out of the game is incredibly strong. So I think you have to consider that when you're playing it. But then the main card of the deck is 3 copies of Trap Tracks. So this is sort of the idea behind this entire deck. What Trap Tracks does is you can target 1 monster you control, destroy it, and if you do, set a normal trap card directly from your deck, except Trap Tracks, and then it can be activated this turn, and you can only use 1 trap for the rest of the turn. So the idea with Trap Tracks is you're able to set a Shaddoll monster and then pop the Shaddoll monster with Trap Tracks, and that's going to trigger the effect of your Shaddoll monster while getting you a normal trap card. So you can gain advantage by destroying your Shaddolls. Your Shaddolls can get utility like searches, or you can send more Shaddoll cards, and then you can set any normal trap in the game. So I think that's very strong because now you also have the option to play just one of so many different traps. You don't have to play 2 like you did with Trap Tricks. So let me show you some of the traps that we're actually playing. We are playing 3 copies of Paleozoic Dynamiscus. This is one of the only 3 of traps that I play. The reason being, I think Dynamiscus is incredibly strong into every single matchup out there. It also triggers Shaddolls in your hand for when your hand is, let's say, full of them. You don't have a fusion outlet to get rid of them. Dynamiscus can just get rid of a card on the field. It's just incredibly strong at outing pretty much anything in the game right now. If you're struggling with a card like a Rise Art, you can use this to out it. It's just super strong, and I think you definitely want to play 3 copies of it. Triggers the Shaddolls effect as well, which is really important. And then now for the 1 of traps, we're starting off with 1 copy of Lost Wind. I wanted some form of effect negation, so Lost Wind sort of fulfills that role. It also has the effect to reset itself back from the grave, which is really great for extra tempo. And then for the next 1 of trap, we're playing 1 Compulse. This is just a removal trap without destroying, and I think that's important against cards like a Rise Art with like Goliath attached to it. You want to be able to out cards like that. 1 copy of Punishment sort of does the same thing as Compulse, except I wanted a trap that actually helps me get to Engine as well. You can use this to pop a monster, then dump Apkallone, and the Apkallone can be used to search a Shaddoll, dump a Shaddoll. It's just incredibly powerful. And then we're playing 1 copy of Torrential Tribute. If your opponent activates the effect to summon a monster, you can go chain trap tracks, pop your monster, set Torrential Tribute. They resolve summoning their monster. You get your Shaddoll effect, and then you get Torrential Tribute as well. You can just blow up their entire board, and it's sort of difficult to play around because your opponent's never going to know when you actually have this card, because you can always get to it with the trap track. And then we're playing 1 copy of Sinister Shadow Games as well. So Sinister Shadow Games is just like that extra engine. If you don't have access to your Shaddoll engine, or you have very weak Shaddoll engine, you want to set this off at trap tracks, and this can get you to stronger Shaddoll engine by dumping the needed Shaddoll monsters or cards from your deck. And then I'm playing 1 copy of Daruma Cannon. So sorry for the proxy, but this is a copy of Daruma Cannon. This can be a turn ender against some decks out there. Just mass book a moon, and then you can just take control of the game from there since they pass turn back to you, and usually that's just enough for you to establish control. And it also helps you out like problematic like towers, like monsters, for example, that don't get set. And then next, we're playing 1 copy Heavy Storm Duster. You definitely don't have to play this. You can side this instead and play another extra copy of a trap or something, but I just wanted the option to be able to have this destruction against certain matchups. Just having spell and trap removal against some matchups out there is pretty solid, so I think this is pretty nice. 3 copies of Crackdown. So Crackdown is really good in this deck because not only does it help you out some problematic monsters, it can stop your opponent's play if they need the normal summon to go through. It also synergizes incredibly well with the strategy of this deck because of trap tracks. So for example, you can take your opponent's monster, you can trap tracks it if it doesn't do anything for you on the board, or you can actually fuse with it using Shaddoll Fusion or something like that, which is just really strong. And I think for that reason, Crackdown is an incredibly powerful card in this deck specifically. I think triple Crackdown is pretty solid for that. It's also just a solid trap overall. Even going second, it could have some applications, just being able to try to force something out by trying to take it. And then for these Shaddoll trap cards, we are playing 1 Core, 1 Incarnation, and 1 Schism. These 2 are pretty self-explanatory. Schism, of course, is one of your best grind game tools, and Incarnation in this deck can also be searched with trap tracks, but its graveyard effect is also just going to come up in this deck because you're going to have a lot of set Shaddoll monsters very often, so you can use this as an extra interruption if you set a Squamata or something to pop something. And then Shaddoll Core is just for extra resources. You are playing Sinister Shadow Games and Squamata, so you have the option to dump this to the graveyard to grab back some of your Shaddoll spell and trap resources. And just in a very grindy game state, this is very good when you use this to fusion summon, because your fusions are always grabbing back the fusion spell right away. And when the fusion monster dies, you can grab Core back and then just keep fusing from there. So that's it for the main deck. That's 40 cards. And moving on to the extra deck now. We are playing 3 copies of El Shaddoll Winda, so this is going to seem a little weird because 2 is usually the standard number, but in this deck specifically, Winda's this is the easiest Shaddoll monster to make because you are playing a majority of Dharcs, and assuming that your opponent doesn't have any attributes for you to take with a card like Crackdown, or you just don't see it, I think Winda's just perfect because just playing trap cards and Winda control is very hard for a lot of decks out there to deal with, especially since you have so many ways to remove like problematic monsters that would out Winda, such as like Fenrir. You have so many different trap cards that can actually out it, so your opponent actually won't really be able to do much to a Winda backed up with a bunch of trap cards. And then next we're playing 2 copies of Apkallone, so even though we're only playing 2 copies of Wendy, I think having the second one is important because of Schism. So in the grind game, you're going to have extra Shaddoll stuff in the graveyard. You can just have the option to summon this to negate something and then have it float in a very nice way is very important, I think. It's also important for a card like Dogmatic of Punishment, where you can, this is just the best target you have to dump off of it, and then you get to add a Shaddoll card from your deck to your hand, which is incredibly strong. You can definitely bump up the number of non-Dharc Shaddoll monsters you play. Like I mentioned, you can play Hell Shaddoll Hollow, but I just decided that in this case I prefer Dragon. And then for the 1F Shaddoll monsters, 1 Construct, 1 Shekanaga, and 1 Grista. So 1 Construct is going to seem very weird, but the reason we're only playing 1 is because 1 is super loopable in this deck. You're always going to have access to Resh, more so than you did in regular Shaddolls. So if you really need, you can keep bringing this back. But also, the thing with Construct is like, it's a lot harder to make unless your opponent's specifically playing a deck full of light monsters. So I think that having 1 is okay, just to have the option to make it. But I don't think it's needed at more than 1, since you're trying to play a slower control game. You're not necessarily trying to set up a big suite of resources like in a single turn necessarily like you would in other builds of Shaddolls. So that's why I think 1 Construct's enough. Shekanaga and Grista are just options for Super Polymerization, for example, or Shaddoll Schism. Shekanaga is really strong into a card like Fenrir, because you can either take Fenrir with Crackdown or you can Super Poly it away. And I think Fenrir is one of the big problems that this deck might have. So just having the option to fuse into Shekanaga is pretty strong to get rid of it. Grista's a lot less common, and you definitely don't have to play Grista because fire monsters aren't the most common in the format, but I thought Grista was nice because its effect's actually pretty solid and can be very difficult for some decks to actually play through. So I think for that option, just having that option is pretty good against just any fire decks you may come across. And of course, Shaddoll Core can act as a fire monster, so you can make it, and the matchup is really good in. And then for the Super Polymerization targets specifically, we're playing Mudragon, Starving Venom, and Garura. So I just never want a Super Polymerization to be dead, just because of how strong it is. If you don't have Shaddoll monsters on the board, cool, you can still make these most of the time, and it's going to cover most, if not all, the matchups you're coming across. Meaning Super Poly is pretty much never going to be a dead card in any matchup, and I think that's incredibly nice because Super Poly is just such a strong card. So these are just probably the most standard targets out there. Not much to really say about them. They just cover the widest array of matchups out there. And then for the Link monsters, we're starting off with 1 copy of Gravity Controller. So this is like an honorary Shaddoll monster. You just always summon your Shaddoll fusions in the extra monster zone, link them off for Gravity Controller, and then you can grab back a Shaddoll Spell or Trap. And then Gravity Controller acts as a Dharc monster to make Winda afterwards, which is really nice. Playing 1 copy of Artemis, the Magistus Moon Maiden, all it does is it takes level 4 lower spellcaster, and it's a light monster. So for the hands where you need to make Contract to start your plays, you can just turn any normal summon Shaddoll into this, and then you can fuse them away. Next, we're playing 1 copy of Dharc the Dark Charmer. You are playing a bunch of Dharc monsters, and I figured Dharc the Dark Charmer is pretty good because there are some cases where you'll have like extra bodies on the board that you take that aren't really useful. You can link them off for this, and then Dharc can like either crash and search a Shaddoll monster, or you can just stay on board and steal one of your opponent's Dharc monsters. Just really good. And then finally, 1 copy of Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. I just didn't want to lose to big towers monsters or like get into a game state where it's just like impossible for you to out something. So I think that having access to this in the extra deck is pretty nice, especially since we have a bit of flex spots in the extra deck. So that's going to do it for the deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section below. I just want to reiterate that this is just my way of playing the Trap Shaddoll deck. You definitely don't have to play in this way. I just thought it was a cool idea to use Trap Track, since when I read the card, I thought it had a lot of potential in this deck. Just having the synergy with being able to pop your Shaddoll monsters and then search a bunch of one-of normal trap cards, I thought was really strong. If you do decide you don't want to play this trap track build, like you can still play like regular trap Shaddolls with just a bunch of trap cards and just go from there. The playstyle will kind of be the same. But all that being said, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.